Marcus Wellington stood at the
You won't
floor-to-ceiling
believe
windows
what's
of his
happened.
Manhattan penthouse office, watching the city pulse with live 40 stories below. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his mahogany desk, where contracts worth millions lay scattered like fallen leaves. At 52, he commanded a business empire that spanned 3 continents, yet the weight of his success felt heavier than ever. The intercom buzzed sharply. "Mr. Wellington, your car is ready for the airport," his assistant announced. Marcus glanced at his Rolex. The board meeting in Tokyo had been moved up by 6 hours, cutting his already brief return home even shorter. He had planned to spend the evening with his 7-year-old daughter Emma, perhaps read her a bedtime story or help with homework. Instead, he would catch a red-eye flight and return to the endless cycle of meetings, negotiations, and decisions that had consumed his life since his wife Sarah's death 2 years ago. "Thank you, Janet. I'll be down in 5 minutes," he replied, his voice carrying the practiced authority that had built his fortune. As he gathered his documents, Marcus's mind wandered to the sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, that had once been filled with Sarah's laughter and Emma's joyful chatter. Now it felt more like a museum than a home, maintained by a staff who moved through its halls like ghosts. The only constant warmth came from Rosa Martinez, the woman who had cared for his family for the past 8 years. Rosa had arrived at their doorstep during Sarah's pregnancy, a quiet woman in her late 30s with gentle hands and kind eyes. Sarah had hired her instantly, drawn to Rosa's genuine warmth and natural way with children. What had started as a housekeeping position had evolved into something much more precious. Rosa had become the steady heartbeat of their home. The elevator descended smoothly to the garage, where his driver waited beside the black Bentley. Marcus slid into the leather seats, his phone already buzzing with calls from Hong Kong, London, and Sao Paulo. The familiar weight of global responsibility settled on his shoulders as he fielded questions about market fluctuations and merger details. During the drive to JFK Airport, Marcus found himself thinking about Emma's last school play. He had promised to attend, had even cleared his calendar, but a crisis in the Singapore office had demanded his immediate attention. Rosa had gone in his place, recording every moment on her phone and sending him clips throughout the evening. In the videos, he could see Emma's face light up each time she spotted Rosa in the audience, her surrogate family cheering louder than any parent. The guilt gnawed at him constantly. He was building a legacy for Emma, securing her future with every deal he closed, every company he acquired. But what good was financial security if he was absent for the moments that mattered? Sarah used to tease him about his workaholic tendencies, threatening to hide his phone if he didn't put it down during family dinners. Now there was no one to enforce those boundaries, no one to remind him that some things mattered more than profit margins. On the plane to Tokyo, Marcus tried to focus on the presentation materials, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Greenwich. Rosa would be preparing Emma's dinner now, probably listening patiently to stories about playground adventures and classroom dramas. She had a gift for making ordinary moments feel special, turning simple meals into celebrations, transforming homework sessions into games, finding magic in the mundane tasks of daily life. Marcus remembered the day Sarah had been diagnosed with the aggressive cancer that would claim her life within 6 months. Rosa had been the one to hold Emma when the little girl finally understood that Mommy wouldn't be coming home from the hospital. She had slept on the floor beside Emma's bed for weeks, chasing away nightmares and providing the comfort that Marcus, drowning in his own grief, had been unable to offer. After Sarah's funeral, when relatives had whispered about boarding schools and the impossibility of single parenthood for a man with his responsibilities, Rosa had quietly approached him. "Mr. Wellington," she had said in her soft, accented voice, "Emma needs stability. She needs to stay home, in familiar surroundings. I will help however I can." Her devotion had been absolute and unquestioning. She worked longer hours without complaint, took on responsibilities far beyond her job description, and never once made him feel guilty about his frequent absences. When Emma had broken her arm during a school field trip, Rosa had been the one to rush to the hospital, to hold her during the x-rays, to stay up all night monitoring her pain medication. Marcus had been in London, closing a deal worth $200 million. The Tokyo meetings blurred together in a haze of PowerPoint presentations and strategic discussions. Marcus found himself checking his phone constantly for messages from home, though he knew Rosa would only contact him in a genuine emergency. She understood the demands of his business better than most, having witnessed Sarah's patient explanations about Daddy's important work and the necessity of his frequent travel. Between meetings, Marcus called home to say goodnight to Emma. Rosa always made sure Emma was ready for the call, having helped her with homework and completed her bedtime routine. Their conversations were brief but precious, Emma chattering about her day while Marcus tried to sound present and engaged despite the exhaustion weighing on him. "Daddy, when are you coming home?" Emma asked during one such call. "Soon, sweetheart. Daddy's working hard to finish everything so I can spend time with you. Rosa said we can bake cookies when you get back. She's teaching me Grandma's recipe." Marcus felt a pang of emotion. Sarah's mother had passed away before Emma was born, but somehow Rosa had managed to create connections to family traditions that might otherwise have been lost. She had a gift for preserving the past while nurturing the future, for keeping Sarah's memory alive without letting grief overshadow Emma's childhood. The deal in Tokyo concluded successfully, adding another subsidiary to Marcus's growing empire. As he prepared for the flight home, he felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and emptiness that accompanied his professional victories. He was building something significant, creating value and employment for thousands of people around the world. Yet the cost felt higher each year, measured in missed bedtimes, absent father-daughter dates, and the growing distance he sensed in Emma's voice during their phone calls. During the long flight back to New York, Marcus made a decision. He would surprise Emma by coming home a day early. The board meeting in Chicago could be postponed, and the conference calls with European partners could be rescheduled for later in the week. For once, business would wait while he reclaimed a piece of his role as a father. The idea energized him in a way that million-dollar deals no longer could. He imagined Emma's face when he walked through the front door unexpected, perhaps in time for dinner or her bedtime story. He could help her with homework, ask about her friends, maybe even convince her to show him the dance routine she had been practicing for weeks. Marcus sent a brief message to his assistant, instructing her to clear his schedule for the next 24 hours and reschedule all non-essential commitments. He turned off his phone's business notifications and settled back in his seat, allowing himself to anticipate the simple pleasure of an uninterrupted evening with his daughter. The plane touched down at JFK in the early afternoon, several hours ahead of schedule due to favorable winds. Marcus felt lighter than he had in months as he directed his driver toward Greenwich, watching the familiar landscape of his childhood roll past the windows. The autumn foliage painted the Connecticut countryside in brilliant oranges and reds, reminding him of walks he used to take with Sarah through their property's extensive gardens. Their estate sat on 15 acres of carefully manicured grounds, invisible from the main road behind a wall of ancient oak trees. The Georgian mansion had been in Sarah's family for 3 generations before Marcus had renovated it with modern amenities while preserving its historical character. It was the kind of home that appeared in architectural magazines, with its columned portico, perfectly symmetrical windows, and gardens that looked like something from an English countryside estate. As the car wound up the circular driveway, Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. The house looked magnificent as always, its brick facade glowing in the afternoon sunlight, but it still felt empty without Sarah's presence to fill its grand spaces with warmth and laughter. Only Emma's room, with its bright colors and scattered toys, and the kitchen, where Rosa spent most of her time, felt truly alive. Marcus thanked his driver and walked toward the front entrance, his key ready. The heavy oak door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing the marble foyer with its crystal chandelier and sweeping staircase. The house was quiet, filled with the kind of peaceful stillness that suggested Emma was either napping or absorbed in some quiet activity. He set down his briefcase and loosened his tie, feeling his body begin to relax for the first time in days. The familiar sense of home, fresh flowers from Rosa's weekly arrangements, the faint aroma of whatever delicious meal she was preparing, and the subtle vanilla candles that Sarah had loved wrapped around him like a gentle embrace. Marcus checked his watch. Emma would normally be having the kitchen scene that greeted Marcus defied every assumption he had made about Rosa Martinez over the past 8 years. She sat at the breakfast counter with Emma, but instead of the casual clothes she typically wore while working, Rosa was dressed in an elegant navy blue suit that spoke of professional authority. Her usually simple hairstyle was swept into a sophisticated chignon, and she wore pearls that caught the afternoon light streaming through the bay windows. But it was not her appearance that rendered Marcus speechless. Spread across the granite countertop were documents, photographs, and what appeared to be architectural blueprints. Emma sat beside Rosa, completely absorbed in a leather-bound portfolio that Rosa was explaining with the patience of a teacher and the expertise of someone intimately familiar with complex subject matter. "So this building will help families like Miguel's?" Emma asked, pointing to one of the photographs. "Exactly, Pequena," Rosa replied, her voice carrying an authority Marcus had never heard before. "The medical center will provide free healthcare to children whose families cannot afford treatment. And here," she indicated another section of the blueprints, "we will have a school where kids can learn English and computer skills while their parents work." Marcus pressed himself against the doorframe, his business instincts telling him to retreat and process what he was witnessing. The documents scattered across the counter bore official letterheads he recognized: the mayor's office, the city planning commission, and several major construction companies. In the center of it all was a proposal bearing Rosa's name as the primary applicant for a multi-million-dollar community development project. Emma picked up a photograph showing a groundbreaking ceremony. "Is this you, Rosa?" she asked, studying the image of Rosa in a hard hat, surrounded by city officials and community leaders, holding a golden shovel. "Sigh, that was last month when we began construction on the first phase," Rosa explained, her fingers gently touching the photo. "Your mama always said that people with blessings should share them with others. I have been very blessed, so I try to help where I can." Marcus felt the world tilting around him. The woman he had known as his dedicated housekeeper, the quiet presence who anticipated his family's needs and never asked for anything beyond her modest salary, was apparently operating some kind of significant charitable organization. The scale of the project visible in the document suggested funding in the millions of dollars, far beyond what anyone could accomplish on a housekeeper's wages. "Tell me again about the playground," Emma said, her eyes bright with excitement. Rosa smiled, the expression transforming her face with a warmth that Marcus recognized but was now seeing in an entirely different context. "It will be the biggest playground in the neighborhood, with special equipment for children who use wheelchairs or have other challenges. Every child deserves to play safely and feel included." As Rosa continued explaining the project to Emma, Marcus found himself studying the woman he thought he knew with the analytical eye that had made him successful in business. Her posture spoke of confidence and authority, her knowledge of the technical details was impressive, and the respect evident in the official correspondence scattered before them suggested she wielded considerable influence in circles he had never imagined her accessing. A manila folder caught his eye, partially hidden beneath other papers. The tab was labeled Wellington Foundation, in Rosa's careful handwriting. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He had never established any foundation, had never authorized the use of his family name for charitable purposes. Yet there it was, in black and white, suggesting connections he could not begin to fathom. Emma's voice pulled him back to the conversation. "Can I help paint the walls when they are ready? I'm really good at staying inside the lines now." "We will see, Pequena. First we need to finish all the grown-up paperwork and make sure everything is safe." Rosa's voice carried the gentle firmness that Marcus had watched her use to guide Emma through everything from homework to difficult emotions following Sarah's death. The afternoon light shifted, casting different shadows across the documents, and Marcus caught sight of financial statements that made his breath catch. The numbers were substantial, not billionaire substantial, but certainly representing wealth far beyond what any household employee should possess. His mind raced through possibilities, none of them comfortable to contemplate. Had Rosa been stealing from him? The thought felt like a betrayal even as it formed in his mind, contradicting everything he had observed about her character over the years. But how else could she fund projects of this magnitude? His household accounts were managed by his business office, with Rosa's salary and household expenses handled automatically. He had never paid close attention to the details, trusting his staff to manage such mundane matters. Marcus thought about the small gifts Rosa brought Emma, always modest, always thoughtful, never extravagant enough to raise questions. He remembered Rosa declining his offers to increase her salary, saying he was comfortable and grateful for the steady employment. He recalled her living simply, driving an older but well-maintained Honda, wearing clothes that were neat but never expensive. Yet the evidence before him suggested a double life of staggering proportions. "Rosa," Emma said, carefully organizing some of the photographs, "are you going to tell Daddy about this? I think he would want to help too. He's always helping people with his business." Rosa's hand stilled on the papers, and Marcus saw something flicker across her face, an expression he could not quite interpret. "Your papa is a very busy man, Paquina. He has many important responsibilities. But this is important too," Emma insisted with the logic of a 7-year-old. "You always tell me that helping people is the most important thing we can do." "You are right, Emma more. But sometimes people help in different ways. Your papa helps by creating jobs and supporting the economy. I help in smaller ways, in my neighborhood." Marcus felt a sting at her words. Rosa's smaller ways appeared to dwarf his own charitable contributions, which consisted mainly of corporate donations managed by his tax attorneys and public relations team. When had he last personally visited a charity
Have you
he supported?
seen it?
No, sir.
When had he last
I
involved
haven't.
Emma in acts of service that connected her to the broader community? The sound of footsteps in the foyer interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Rosa immediately began gathering the documents with practiced efficiency, her movements quick but not panicked. It was clear she had systems in place for managing this parallel life, ways of compartmentalizing her roles that Marcus was only beginning to appreciate. "Mrs. Patterson from next door is here for our appointment," Rosa said to Emma, checking her watch. "Why don't you go practice piano while we talk about the fundraising dinner?" Emma nodded obediently, sliding off the stool and gathering her school backpack. "Will you help me with math homework later?" "Of course, Paquina. After I finish with Mrs. Patterson." Marcus watched Emma skip toward the music room, her complete trust in Rosa evident in every step. His daughter had no idea that the woman who helped with homework and made her favorite meals was apparently leading development projects that would impact hundreds of families. The compartmentalization was so complete that Emma, despite her natural curiosity, seemed to accept Rosa's appointments and paperwork as normal parts of adult life. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the kitchen doorway moments later, and Marcus pressed himself further back into the shadows. Eleanor Patterson was Greenwich High Society old money, multiple charitable boards, and the kind of social connections that opened doors throughout Connecticut and Manhattan. "Rosa, darling," Mrs. Patterson said, embracing Rosa warmly. "I have wonderful news about the hospital board's decision." "Darling?" Marcus had known Eleanor Patterson socially for years, had served on 2 boards with her husband, and she had never addressed him with such genuine affection. "Please, sit," Rosa said, gesturing to the stools at the breakfast counter. "Can I get you coffee? Tea? Coffee would be lovely. I'm absolutely exhausted from the board meeting, but it was worth every minute. They've approved the full funding for the pediatric wing, Rosa. All of it. $2.3 million. Marcus gripped the doorframe so hard his knuckles went white. $2.3 million. The casual way Mrs. Patterson mentioned the figure suggested this was just one of potentially many projects Rosa was somehow connected to. "That is wonderful news," Rosa replied, her voice warm with genuine emotion. "Dr. Martinez will be so relieved. She has been worried about having to turn away families who cannot pay." "Dr. Martinez?" Mrs. Patterson accepted the coffee Rosa prepared with obvious familiarity with the kitchen routine. "Your sister-in-law is doing remarkable work at the clinic." The board was impressed by her proposal and her track record of community service. Sister-in-law? Marcus felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. In 8 years, Rosa had never mentioned any family beyond occasional references to cousins in California. She certainly had never mentioned a sister-in-law who was apparently a doctor running a clinic significant enough to warrant major hospital board funding. "Maria has dedicated her life to serving families who have nowhere else to turn," Rosa said. The new equipment will allow her to treat conditions that previously required expensive referrals to specialists in the city. Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. And the education component you proposed is brilliant. Teaching financial literacy alongside medical care will help these families build sustainable futures. Education component? Financial literacy? Marcus listened with growing amazement as the two women discussed program details that rivaled the scope of initiatives his own corporate foundation supported. Rosa spoke with the fluency of someone deeply versed in non-profit management, healthcare policy, and community development strategies. The school district has agreed to provide space for the evening classes, Rosa continued. We will need volunteers with bilingual skills to help with translation, but the community college has committed to providing certified instructors. I have at least a dozen friends who would love to help, Mrs. Patterson said enthusiastically. This is exactly the kind of meaningful engagement they've been seeking. So much more fulfilling than another charity gala. Marcus thought about the charity galas he attended, networking events disguised as philanthropy, where the cost of a table often exceeded the amount actually donated to the cause being celebrated. He had written checks, posed for photographs, and considered his charitable obligations fulfilled. But listening to Rosa and Mrs. Patterson discuss hands-on community engagement made his own contributions feel hollow by comparison. There is one concern the board raised, Mrs. Patterson said, her tone becoming more serious. They want assurance that the funding will be properly managed. Your track record is impeccable, but the scale of this project requires additional oversight. Rosa nodded thoughtfully. I understand their position completely. The community deserves accountability for every dollar donated. Would you be open to having the Wellington Foundation serve as fiscal agent? Their reputation for financial transparency is beyond question, and it would give the hospital board complete confidence in the project's management. Marcus felt his heart stop. The Wellington Foundation, the folder he had seen earlier, made sense now. Somehow, Rosa had established an organization using his family name, and it had apparently developed a reputation substantial enough to reassure major institutional donors. I am not certain Mr. Wellington would approve, Rosa said carefully. He is very particular about his family's involvement in charitable activities. Oh, my dear, Mrs. Patterson laughed. James Wellington has been singing your praises for months. He told the board that your foundation represents exactly the kind of grassroots community engagement that wealthy families should support. James Wellington? Marcus searched his memory, trying to place the name. Then, it hit him, James was his cousin, a successful attorney who managed charitable giving for several prominent families. Marcus had not spoken to James in over a year, had no idea he was even aware of Rosa's existence, let alone advocating for her projects to institutional boards. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering details about construction timelines, staffing requirements, and fundraising strategies. Marcus listened in stunned silence as Rosa demonstrated expertise in areas he had spent years studying in business school. Her questions were sophisticated, her suggestions practical, and her understanding of non-profit governance surprisingly comprehensive. After Mrs. Patterson left, Rosa returned to the kitchen. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 8 years of unspoken truths. Marcus stepped fully into the kitchen, his business shoes clicking against the hardwood floors that Rosa polished to perfection every week. Her hands remained steady as she folded the apron she had been about to put on, her dark eyes watching him with a calmness that somehow made his own racing heart feel more chaotic. Rosa, he began, then stopped. What question should come first? How could he even begin to address what he had witnessed? I heard you talking with Mrs. Patterson. Yes, she said simply. She came to discuss the hospital funding. Marcus moved closer to the breakfast counter where traces of their meeting remained, a coffee cup with lipstick marks, a pen Mrs. Patterson had forgotten, and a single photograph that Rosa had missed in her careful cleanup. He picked up the image, studying the groundbreaking ceremony he had observed earlier. This is you, he said, though it was not really a question. Yes. Her responses were maddeningly brief, offering no explanations, no justifications, no defensive explanations. Marcus felt his frustration building, not with anger but with confusion that cut deeper than any business crisis he had ever navigated. "Rosa, I need to understand what I just saw." Mrs. Patterson mentioned millions of dollars, medical centers, schools. She talked about the Wellington Foundation as if. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "As if it exists?" Rosa supplied gently. "It does exist, Mr. Wellington." The simple statement hit him like a physical blow. "I never established a foundation. I never authorized the use of my family name for anything like this." Rosa nodded slowly, then moved to the cabinet where she kept household files. She withdrew a thick folder and placed it on the counter between them. "Perhaps you should sit down." Marcus remained standing, his hands gripping the edge of the granite counter. "Just explain it to me, please." Rosa opened the folder and withdrew a document that Marcus recognized immediately, his own legal letterhead, bearing his signature on papers he had no memory of ever seeing. The date was 3 years old, shortly after Sarah's first anniversary memorial service. "You signed these papers on October 15th, 3 years ago," Rosa said quietly. "You were in your study, working very late. I brought you coffee, and you asked me to witness some documents your attorney had sent over. You said they were routine charitable filings." Marcus stared at the papers, his signature clear and unmistakable at the bottom. The documents established the Wellington Foundation with Rosa Martinez as executive director and primary trustee. His own assets were not involved, but his name and reputation were formally attached to an organization he had apparently created while completely distracted by work. "I don't remember this," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, a vague recollection surfaced. He remembered that terrible week when grief had hit him particularly hard, when the anniversary of Sarah's death had sent him spiraling into work as an escape. There had been papers, late-night signatures, routine business that his attorneys handled. He had signed dozens of documents that week without reading them carefully. "You were very sad that week," Rosa said softly. "You worked until very late every night. You signed many papers." Marcus looked up from the documents to study Rosa's face. There was no triumph there, no sense of having gotten away with something. Instead, he saw something that looked almost like sorrow. "But why, Rosa? Why would you do this?" Rosa was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Your wife made me promise something before she died." The mention of Sarah sent a familiar ache through Marcus's chest. "What kind of promise?" "She was worried about you, about Emma. She said the work was consuming you, that you were disappearing into the business to avoid the pain. She made me promise to take care of both of you, but not just with cooking and cleaning." Rosa's eyes met his directly. "She made me promise to make sure Emma grew up understanding that wealth brings responsibility, that blessing others should be natural, not burdensome." Marcus felt the room spinning slightly. "Sarah said that. She said you used to talk about changing the world when you were younger, before the business became so demanding. She worried that Emma would grow up seeing money as something to accumulate rather than something to share." Rosa's voice grew stronger, more confident. "She asked me to find ways to help Emma understand service to others, even if you were too busy to teach it yourself." The words hit Marcus like accusations, though Rosa's tone held no judgment. He thought about his younger self, fresh out of college and full of idealistic plans to build a business that would make a difference. When had profit margins replaced purpose? When had he stopped thinking about impact beyond quarterly earnings reports? "So you started a foundation without telling me." "I started with small things," Rosa explained. "I used my own savings to help families in my neighborhood. A sick child here, a family facing eviction there. But the needs were so much greater than what I could address alone." Marcus looked around the kitchen, trying to process the scope of what she was describing. "Your savings? Rosa, where did you get the money for projects like what Mrs. Patterson described?" For the first time since their conversation began, Rosa hesitated. Her hands smoothed the folder's edges nervously, and she avoided his gaze. "That is more complicated to explain. Try me, Marcus said, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. His business instincts screamed that he should be angry, should feel betrayed, but he found himself genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Rosa moved to the window, looking out at the gardens that she helped maintain. My family was not always poor, Mr. Wellington. Before we came to America, my father owned land in Mexico, good farmland that fed many families. When the economy changed, when the big agricultural companies took over, we lost everything. She turned back to face him, her expression distant with memory. But my grandmother, she was clever. She taught me that when you have nothing left to lose, you can take risks that other people cannot afford. She had saved some money, hidden it away for years in case we ever needed to start over. Marcus listened intently, beginning to understand that Rosa's story was far more complex than the simple narrative of immigrant hardship he had assumed. When I came here, I worked many jobs. Cleaning houses, caring for elderly people, working in restaurant kitchens. But I also watched, learned how wealthy families managed their money. I saved every dollar I could, and I invested carefully. You invested? Marcus could not hide his surprise. Rosa's smile was sad but proud. Cleaning houses for rich families teaches you many things, Mr. Wellington. You hear phone conversations about stock tips, overhear financial advisors discussing market trends. You learn which companies treat their employees well, which ones are growing, which ones give back to their communities. Marcus felt a creeping sense of embarrassment. In 8 years, he had never once asked Rosa about her background, her education, or her aspirations beyond her role in his household. He had made assumptions based on her position, never considering that she might possess knowledge and skills he had never imagined. For 15 years, I invested carefully and lived simply. When families I worked for did well in the stock market, I researched their investments and followed their strategies. When I saw them make mistakes, I learned to avoid similar errors. Rosa's voice grew stronger as she continued. By the time I came to work for your family, I had accumulated enough money to help others in meaningful ways. The revelation was staggering. While Marcus had been building his empire through corporate acquisitions and complex financial instruments, his housekeeper had been quietly building her own wealth through careful observation and disciplined investing. But the Wellington Foundation, Rosa. You used my name, my reputation. Don't you understand how this looks? Rosa nodded solemnly. I understand perfectly. It looks like I deceived you, used your trust for my own purposes. And perhaps I did. She paused, meeting his gaze directly. But I also kept my promise to your wife. What do you mean? Emma knows about the projects, Mr. Wellington. She has been helping me plan ways to include children in the community programs. She has been learning that having resources means having responsibility to others. Rosa's voice softened. Your daughter has a generous heart because she has been taught to see beyond her own needs. Marcus thought about Emma's earlier questions about helping paint walls, her excitement about playgrounds for children with disabilities. These were not abstract concepts to her, they were real projects that Rosa had made tangible and accessible. Sarah wanted Emma to grow up understanding service, Rosa continued. But she also wanted you to find your way back to the person you used to be, the man who built his first business to create jobs in struggling communities. Marcus had not thought about his original company in years. He had sold it early in his career, using the profits to fund larger ventures that ultimately made him wealthy. But Rosa was right, that first business had been motivated by social impact as much as financial return. The sound of piano music drifted from the music room, Emma practicing scales with the dedication that Rosa encouraged in all her activities. Marcus listened to the familiar melody, wondering how many other aspects of his daughter's character development he had missed while traveling the world closing deals. The foundation has been using your name because the community projects are for Emma's benefit as much as anyone else's, Rosa explained. She needed to see wealth used responsibly. She needed to understand that her father's success created opportunities to help others. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the implications of what Rosa was telling him. You've been running a multi-million-dollar charity operation from my kitchen. From my apartment mostly, Rosa corrected. The kitchen meetings are only for projects that directly impact Emma's education about community service. Your apartment? Rosa looked surprised by his confusion. I have not lived here full-time since Emma turned 6, Mr. Wellington. I have my own place in Stamford, near the community centre where most of our programs operate. Marcus stared at her in shock. But, you're here every morning when I leave, every evening when I return from trips. Yes, because Emma needs consistency and you need to know she is properly cared for. But I do not sleep in the guest quarters anymore. I have not needed to since Emma stopped having nightmares about her mama. Another assumption shattered. Marcus had simply presumed that Rosa lived in their house full-time, had never questioned where she went on her days off or what kind of life she maintained outside their walls. Rosa, I need to ask you something directly. Marcus chose his words carefully. Have you ever taken money from my household accounts? Even temporarily, even for charitable purposes? Rosa's answer was immediate and firm. Never. Not $1. Your business manager handles all household expenses through direct payment to suppliers. I have never had access to your family's money beyond my salary, which is deposited directly to my personal account. The relief Marcus felt was profound, though he realized it also revealed the extent to which he had been prepared to believe the worst. Then, how do you fund projects of this magnitude? Careful investment over many years, generous donations from community members who believe in our work, and partnerships with other organizations that share our goals. Rosa's explanation was delivered with the confidence of someone completely comfortable with her financial management. The Wellington Foundation does not depend on your family's wealth, Mr. Wellington. It uses your family's reputation to open doors and create credibility. Marcus struggled to process the elegant complexity of what Rosa had created. She had built a substantial charitable operation while maintaining her role in his household, using his name to leverage community support while funding the actual work through her own resources and fundraising efforts. Mrs. Patterson mentioned my cousin James. How does he know about any of this? Mr. James Wellington serves on several boards with community leaders who have worked with our foundation. When those leaders spoke positively about our projects, he began investigating our operations to ensure they met his standards for organizations bearing the Wellington name. And he concluded that our work reflects well on your family's values and has been advising other philanthropists to support our initiatives. Rosa paused. He also said he hoped you would eventually become directly involved, once your grief allowed you to engage with charitable work again. The conversation was interrupted by Emma's voice calling from the music room. Rosa. I finished practicing. Can we work on math now? Coming, Paquina. Rosa called back, then turned to Marcus. We should continue this conversation later. Emma needs help with her homework, and you should spend time with her. She missed you very much. Marcus felt dismissed, though not rudely. Rosa was simply prioritizing Emma's needs, as she had done consistently for years. But, now that prioritization felt different, less like employee dedication and more like someone protecting a child she genuinely loved. This isn't finished, Rosa, he said quietly. No, she agreed. It is not finished. There is much more you need to understand. As Rosa left the kitchen to help Emma, Marcus remained. Marcus spent the evening watching Rosa and Emma work together on math homework, seeing their interaction through completely different eyes. Every gentle correction, every encouraging word, every patient explanation revealed layers of Rosa's character that he had been blind to for years. She taught with the natural skill of someone who understood how children learned, adapting her approach when Emma struggled with fractions and celebrating enthusiastically when concepts finally clicked. After tucking Emma into bed, Rosa returned to the kitchen to find Marcus still sitting at the breakfast counter, the foundation document spread before him like pieces of a puzzle he was trying to solve. You said there was much more I needed to understand, he said without preamble. Rosa poured herself a cup of tea and sat across from him. In the evening light, without the professional attire she had worn for Mrs. Patterson's visit, she looked more like the woman he was accustomed to seeing. But the confidence in her posture, the directness of her gaze, spoke to the community leader he had discovered that afternoon. Where would you like me to begin? She asked. Begin with why you came to work for us. The real reason. Rosa was quiet for a long moment, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. Your wife advertised for household help, but she was very specific about what she wanted. She asked for someone who had experience with children, who spoke Spanish, and who understood that wealthy families had responsibilities beyond themselves. Marcus tried to remember Sarah's process of finding household help. He had been traveling constantly during her pregnancy, leaving most domestic arrangements in her capable hands. I responded to her advertisement because the way she wrote it suggested she was looking for more than just an employee. She wanted someone who would be part of raising a child to understand the world beyond privilege. Rosa's voice grew softer with memory. When I met her, she asked me questions that had nothing to do with cleaning or cooking. What kind of questions? She asked about my family, my values, what I hoped children would learn about helping others. She asked if I had ever lived in communities where people struggled to meet basic needs. Rosa smiled slightly. She said she wanted Emma to grow up bilingual not just in language, but in perspective. Marcus felt another piece of his wife's wisdom revealing itself posthumously. Sarah had always possessed an intuitive understanding of people and situations that complemented his analytical approach to life. He should have realized she would bring the same thoughtfulness to choosing someone who would help raise their daughter. She hired me because I told her about my grandmother's teaching, Rosa continued. My abuela always said that people who have enough to share have a responsibility to those who do not. Your wife said she wanted Emma to learn that lesson naturally, as part of daily life. But you were already wealthy by then, weren't you? You didn't need the job. Rosa nodded slowly. I could have supported myself, yes. But your wife offered me something I wanted more than financial security. She offered me the chance to influence how a privileged child understood the world. The statement hung in the air between them, challenging every assumption Marcus had made about employment relationships and motivations. Rosa had not taken the job because she needed it, but because it aligned with her own values and goals. So this was always a mission for you? Shaping Emma's character? Not exactly, Rosa said carefully. I genuinely cared about your family's welfare. But, yes, I also saw an opportunity to model different ways of thinking about wealth and responsibility. Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation, but finding only honesty. Tell me about the other families you worked for. Were you doing the same thing with their children? Some, Rosa acknowledged. But those situations were different. Other employers saw household staff as invisible, as service providers who should not express opinions or values. Your wife actively sought my perspective on raising Emma. Marcus thought about his own interactions with Rosa over the years. Had he treated her as invisible? He tried to recall conversations beyond basic household coordination and realized how little he had engaged with her as a person rather than as an employee. After Sarah died, Rosa continued, I had to decide whether to stay or find another position. Emma needed stability, but you were drowning in grief and work. I realized I could honor my promise to your wife while also using your family's resources in ways that would benefit Emma's development. Our resources? I thought you said you never used our money. Not your financial resources, Rosa clarified. Your name, your social connections, your reputation. The Wellington family name opens doors in this community that would remain closed to Rosa Martinez, regardless of how much money I had accumulated. Marcus was beginning to appreciate the sophisticated strategy Rosa had employed. She had leveraged his family's social capital to create opportunities for community service that would simultaneously benefit others and educate Emma about responsible use of privilege. Walk me through how this actually works, he said, his business mind engaging with the operational details. How do you run foundation projects while maintaining your role here? Rosa pulled out her phone and showed him a calendar application that revealed a complexity of scheduling that rivaled his own corporate commitments. Most foundation work happens during Emma's school hours or in the evenings after she goes to bed. Board meetings, site visits, and major donor meetings are scheduled around her activities. Marcus scrolled through the calendar, amazed by how Rosa had compartmentalized her time. Parent-teacher conferences, dental appointments, and piano recitals were interspersed with construction supervision meetings, grant application deadlines, and community advisory board sessions. "This is extraordinary," he said, genuinely impressed by the organizational skills required to manage such a complex dual life. "It is necessary," Rosa replied simply. "Emma's needs always come first, but there are many hours in the week when she does not require direct supervision. I use that time productively." Marcus looked up from the phone to study Rosa's face. "Don't you ever get tired? This schedule would exhaust most business executives I know." Rosa's smile was gentle but firm. "I get tired, yes. But I also get energized by seeing children receive medical care they could not otherwise afford, by watching families learn skills that help them build better futures." She paused. "And I get great satisfaction from watching Emma develop into someone who thinks naturally about helping others." As if summoned by their conversation about her, Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, looking slightly sheepish. "I couldn't sleep," she said, approaching Rosa with the natural confidence of a child who had never been turned away. "What is worrying you, Pequena?" Rosa asked, opening her arms to welcome Emma. "I keep thinking about what you told me about the children at the medical center," Emma said, settling against Rosa's side. "Do they really not have playgrounds at home?" Marcus watched this exchange with new understanding. Emma's questions were not abstract curiosity, they reflected genuine concern for children Rosa had made real to her through stories and involvement. "Some of them do not have safe places to play," Rosa explained patiently. "Their neighborhoods do not have the same resources as yours." Emma looked troubled by this information. "Could we invite them here? Our playground is big enough to share." Rosa glanced at Marcus, clearly wondering how to answer this question in front of him. The request revealed how thoroughly Emma had internalized the values Rosa had been teaching, but it also highlighted the practical challenges of bridging different social worlds. Marcus surprised himself by responding before Rosa could speak. "That's a beautiful idea, sweetheart. Maybe Rosa can help us figure out how to make that happen." Both Emma and Rosa looked at him with identical expressions of surprise. Marcus realized it was the first time he had actively endorsed Rosa's community work, the first time he had suggested participating rather than simply observing from a distance. "Really, Daddy?" Emma's face lit up with excitement. "We could have a big party with all the kids. We would need to plan carefully," Marcus said, looking to Rosa for guidance. "Rosa knows much more about organizing events like that than I do." Rosa's expression was unreadable, but Marcus thought he detected approval in her slight nod. "It would require significant preparation," she said. "Insurance considerations, safety protocols, coordination with parents and guardians." "But it's possible?" Emma asked hopefully. "With enough planning and adult help, yes, it is possible," Rosa confirmed. Emma beamed with satisfaction before yawning widely. "Can we start planning tomorrow?" "First you need to sleep," Rosa said firmly. "Community service requires well-rested leaders." After Rosa had settled Emma back in bed, she returned to find Marcus researching the Foundation's projects on his laptop. He had found their website, which featured professional photography of children playing in new playgrounds, families attending health screenings, and adults participating in job training programs. "This is impressive work, Rosa," he said without looking up from the screen. "The scope, the professionalism, the measurable outcomes. You've built something significant." "We have built something significant," Rosa corrected gently. "The Wellington name has been crucial to our credibility and fundraising success." Marcus closed the laptop and met her gaze. "I need to ask you something directly, and I want a completely honest answer." Rosa nodded, waiting. "Do you see me as a failure? As a father, as a community member, as someone who has forgotten what really matters?" The question seemed to surprise Rosa. She was quiet for a long time before responding. "I see you as someone who loves his daughter deeply but has been afraid to be present for her in case the pain of losing your wife becomes unbearable." Her voice was gentle but direct. I see you as someone who built extraordinary success but lost sight of why that success matters. The assessment was accurate and painful. Marcus felt exposed by her insight, but also relieved to hear his struggles articulated with such clarity. Your wife knew you would need time to find your way back to the person you wanted to be, Rosa continued. She asked me to keep Emma grounded in service and community while you healed enough to join us. Join you? She always believed you would eventually want to be directly involved in using your resources to help others. She said you just needed someone to show you how to begin again. Marcus felt tears threatening for the first time since Sarah's funeral. The idea that his wife had anticipated his struggles, had arranged for Rosa to serve not just as Emma's caregiver but as a bridge back to his own values, was both comforting and overwhelming. I don't know how to begin, he admitted quietly. You already have, Rosa said, her voice warm with encouragement. You came home early to spend time with Emma. You listened to our conversation today without anger or judgment. You supported Emma's idea about sharing our playground. Marcus looked around the kitchen where Rosa had apparently been planning acts of service for years while he remained oblivious, pursuing deals that felt increasingly meaningless. What happens now? That depends on what you want to happen, Rosa said. The foundation will continue its work with or without your direct involvement. Emma will continue learning about community service. But if you want to honor your wife's hope that you would eventually join us, there are many ways you could contribute. Marcus thought about his upcoming trip to Chicago, the board meetings and acquisition negotiations that filled his calendar for the coming months. None of it felt urgent anymore compared to the possibility of rebuilding a life that included service to others alongside financial success. I want to learn, he said finally. I want to understand what you've built and how I can contribute meaningfully rather than just write checks. Rosa smiled, the expression transforming her face with genuine warmth. There is a community center opening next month that could use volunteers for their after-school program. Many of the children need help with homework, especially math and reading. Marcus considered this suggestion, imagining himself working directly with children rather than managing investment portfolios. The idea was simultaneously appealing and terrifying. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the gymnasium of the Roosevelt Community Center, watching Emma teach piano basics to a group of 8-year-olds. Her patient explanations and encouraging smile reminded him so much of Sarah that his chest tightened with bittersweet emotion. But, unlike the paralyzing grief that had once overwhelmed him when he saw Sarah's traits in their daughter, this recognition felt warm and healing. She's a natural teacher, Rosa said, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee from the volunteer refreshment table. She gets that from her mother, Marcus replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. His hands were still stained with paint from helping repair playground equipment that morning, honest work that left him more satisfied than any corporate acquisition had in years. And, from her father, Rosa added quietly. You should see how the teenagers respond when you help with their math homework. They trust you because you listen without judgment. Marcus watched Emma demonstrate proper finger placement on the donated keyboard, marveling at how naturally she had adapted to working with children from backgrounds completely different from her own. The past 6 months had transformed not just his understanding of community service, but his relationship with his daughter. The changes had begun slowly. Marcus had cancelled the Chicago trip to attend the community center's opening ceremony, surprising everyone including himself. He had expected to feel awkward and out of place, but watching Rosa move through the crowd with easy familiarity, seeing Emma's excitement as she toured the new playground, had made him realize how isolated he had become from the world beyond boardrooms and country clubs. His first volunteer shift had been humbling. The homework help program paired adults with children struggling academically, and Marcus had been assigned to work with Miguel, a bright 10-year-old whose parents worked multiple jobs to support their family. Miguel's math skills were strong, but his reading comprehension lagged behind grade level, requiring patience and creative teaching approaches that challenged Marcus more than any business negotiation. Mr. Marcus, Miguel had said during their 3rd session together, you explain things different than my teachers. You don't get mad when I don't understand right away. The comment had stayed with Marcus for days, making him reflect on how rarely he had applied such patience to his interactions with Emma. Business had trained him to expect quick results and efficient solutions, but working with children required different skills entirely. Rosa had been instrumental in helping him navigate this new world. She served as translator not just between languages, but between social classes, helping Marcus understand family dynamics and cultural considerations he had never encountered. Her respect in the community opened doors that his wealth and status could not, introducing him to families who taught him as much as he hoped to teach their children. The medical center expansion is ahead of schedule, Rosa reported, checking her phone for updates from the construction site. Dr. Martinez says they should be able to open the dental clinic 3 weeks early. Marcus nodded, still amazed by the efficiency with which Rosa managed multiple complex projects. Over the past months, he had gained deep appreciation for her organizational skills and strategic thinking. The foundation now operated with a board of directors that included Marcus as an active member rather than a figurehead, but Rosa remained the operational heart of their work. "Have you given more thought to the education scholarship program?" he asked. Rosa's face lit up with enthusiasm. "I have been researching models from other communities. If we partner with the state university, we could provide not just tuition assistance but also mentoring and support services that help first-generation college students succeed." Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the notes application where he had been tracking potential foundation projects. The list had grown substantially as he learned more about community needs and opportunities for impact. What would be the initial funding requirement? For a pilot program serving 20 students, approximately $400,000 per year for 4 years, Rosa replied immediately. But the long-term economic impact would far exceed the investment. Such conversations had become natural between them, a collaboration that combined Marcus's business expertise with Rosa's community knowledge. He had discovered that his skills in financial analysis and strategic planning translated well to non-profit work when guided by someone who understood the human dimensions of social problems. Emma finished her piano lesson and ran over to them, her face flushed with excitement. "Did you see how well Carmen played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? She couldn't even find middle C last month." "I saw," Marcus said, kneeling to Emma's eye level. "You're becoming an excellent teacher, sweetheart." "Rosa says good teachers never stop learning too," Emma said seriously. "That's why I want to take Spanish lessons so I can help more kids." Marcus looked at Rosa, who smiled with obvious pride. Emma's desire to learn Spanish had emerged naturally from her volunteer work, not as an academic requirement but as a practical tool for better serving others. Rosa had arranged for Emma to spend one afternoon per week with families in the community, practicing conversational Spanish while helping with childcare or simple household tasks. Speaking of learning, Rosa said to Marcus, "The hospital board meets next Tuesday to review the pediatric wing proposals. They would like you to present the financial sustainability analysis." Marcus felt nervous anticipation at the prospect of addressing a room full of medical professionals and community leaders. 6 months ago, he would have delegated such presentations to staff members. But his growing involvement in foundation work had taught him the importance of personal engagement in advocacy efforts. "I'll be ready," he said, meaning it. The hours he had spent studying healthcare economics and community health outcomes represented some of the most meaningful research he had ever conducted. Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, can we go see the new playground before we leave? I want to check on the garden we planted." The three of them walked outside to the playground that had been completed 2 months earlier. Emma ran ahead to inspect the vegetable garden that volunteers had planted along the playground's edge, a project designed to teach children about nutrition and environmental stewardship. Marcus and Rosa followed at a slower pace, watching Emma pull weeds with the focused determination she brought to all her activities. "She has changed so much," Rosa observed. "Not just her interests, but her confidence. She knows she can make a difference in other people's lives." Marcus nodded, thinking about Emma's evolution over the past months. She had always been a bright, caring child, but her involvement in community service had given her a sense of purpose and agency that was remarkable in someone so young. "We all have," he said, glancing at Rosa. Their relationship had transformed as dramatically as his involvement in the foundation. Rosa was no longer his employee in any traditional sense, though she continued to coordinate Emma's daily care and maintain their household routines. She had become his partner in community work, his teacher in understanding social justice issues, and his friend in ways that transcended their original professional arrangement. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said as they watched Emma water the tomato plants with careful attention to each stem. Rosa looked at him with the patient attention she brought to all serious conversations. "I've been thinking about restructuring my business responsibilities. Delegating more operational control to my senior managers so I can focus on strategic oversight and impact investing." Rosa's expression remained neutral, but Marcus caught a flicker of interest in her eyes. "What would that mean practically?" "It would mean being home more often, being available for Emma's school events and volunteer commitments. It would mean having time to be fully present for the foundation work instead of fitting it around travel schedules." Marcus had been considering this restructuring for months, ever since he realized how much of Emma's life he had been missing. The foundation work had shown him that meaningful impact required sustained attention and relationship building that was impossible to maintain while traveling constantly for business. "Emma would be thrilled," Rosa said softly. "She asks me regularly when you'll be able to attend her school performances or volunteer events." The comment stung, though Marcus knew Rosa intended no criticism. Emma's questions reflected natural desires for her father's presence, not unreasonable demands on his time. "I want to be the father Sarah believed I could be," Marcus said. "And I want to be the community member you've shown me how to become." Rosa stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "You already are both of those things, Mr. Wellington. The question is whether you believe it yourself." They continued toward Emma, who had finished her gardening tasks and was now helping younger children navigate the playground equipment with protective care that made Marcus's heart swell with pride. "There's something else," Marcus said. "I want to formalize our partnership in the foundation work. Not just as board members, but as co-directors with equal authority and shared responsibilities." Rosa was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications of his proposal. "Are you certain? Community leadership requires different skills than business management. There will be failures, setbacks, conflicts that cannot be resolved with financial resources alone." Marcus smiled at her practical concerns. "I've learned more about leadership from watching you work with families and volunteers than from 20 years of business school case studies. I'm certain." They had reached the playground, where Emma was demonstrating proper slide technique to a group of preschoolers with the seriousness of a safety instructor. "Look at her," Rosa said with obvious affection. "She has learned that privilege means responsibility, that resources should be shared, that helping others is natural and necessary." Marcus watched his daughter, seeing Sarah's values alive and thriving in Emma's generous spirit. Rosa had kept her promise in ways that exceeded anything Sarah could have imagined when she asked for help raising a child who understood service to others. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. "For what?" "For keeping your word to Sarah. For teaching Emma what I couldn't. For showing me what I had forgotten." Marcus paused, gathering courage for what he needed to say next. "For saving our family." Rosa shook her head gently. "I did not save your family, Mr. Wellington. I helped you remember what family means." Emma ran over to them, slightly out of breath from playground activities. "Can we visit the community center tomorrow too? Mrs. Rodriguez said her daughter wants to learn piano, and I think I could teach her if you help me plan the lessons." "We can definitely arrange that," Marcus said, automatically checking his phone to review his weekend schedule. The gesture was habitual, but his calendar now included volunteer commitments alongside business obligations, service events alongside social functions. As they walked back to the car, Emma chattering about her plans for expanding the children's music program, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, he had discovered Rosa's secret life and felt his world crumble around him. He had expected betrayal, deception, and financial theft. Instead, he had found dedication, wisdom, and love that had been protecting his family while gently guiding them toward becoming their best selves. Rosa's secret had not been about hiding wrongdoing, but about creating space for healing and growth that Marcus had not known he needed. The foundation bearing his name was now truly his foundation, reflecting values he had rediscovered and commitments he was prepared to honor for the rest of his life. Emma's childhood would be shaped not just by privilege, but by purpose. And Marcus had found a way to honor Sarah's memory through service to others rather than escape into work. Standing in the community center parking lot, watching Rosa help Emma buckle her seatbelt while discussing weekend volunteer plans, Marcus realized that the woman who had broken him had also rebuilt him into someone worthy of his daughter's love and his wife's faith. The secret Rosa had guarded for years was not that she had been deceiving him, but that she had been preparing him for the moment when he would be ready to join her in the work that mattered most. She had understood what he had forgotten, that true wealth was measured not in assets accumulated, but in lives touched and communities strengthened. As they drove home through the Connecticut countryside, past mansions that represented financial success without social purpose, Marcus felt grateful for the woman who had shown him that some forms of richness could only be discovered through service to others. Emma's future would be built on foundations more solid than money, values that would guide her toward a life of meaning regardless of her material circumstances. The discovery that had shattered his assumptions about Rosa Martinez had ultimately restored his faith in what family, community, and success could really mean. She had kept her promise to Sarah while teaching him how to keep promises he had never realized he was making to himself, to his daughter, and to the world that had given him so much. Would Emma be involved? She has been asking to help with tutoring. She thinks she could teach younger children piano basics. Rosa's pride in Emma's initiative was evident. It would be good for her to see you engaged in the same kind of service work she is learning to value. As they talked about practical ways Marcus could begin participating in community service, he realized that Rosa had never actually asked him for anything. She had created opportunities, established frameworks, and waited patiently for him to recognize what was already available. The foundation bearing his name had been operating for years without his knowledge or input, successfully serving families while teaching his daughter values he had failed to model himself. Rosa had kept her promise to Sarah while building her own legacy of service, all while maintaining the household routines that kept his professional life functioning smoothly. Marcus understood now why the discovery of Rosa's secret life had broken him. It was not because she had deceived him, but because she had revealed how much he had been deceiving himself about what mattered most. She had shown him that his assumptions about service, about community engagement, about the responsibilities that came with wealth, were shallow and uninformed. But Rosa had also shown him that it was not too late to change, that Emma was still young enough to experience her father as someone who cared about more than profit margins. The foundation and community programs were not closed doors but open invitations to become the person his wife had always believed he could be again. Standing in the kitchen where Rosa had planned years of community service while caring for his family, Marcus realized that the woman who had broken him had also offered him the tools to rebuild himself into someone worthy of Sarah's faith and Emma's love. Standing among the traces of her secret life, trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the community leader who apparently commanded respect throughout Connecticut. The foundation document spread before him represented years of careful planning and dedicated work that had been happening parallel to her care for his family. Marcus picked up the forgotten photograph from the counter, studying Rosa's face during the groundbreaking ceremony. She looked confident and proud, surrounded by officials and community members who clearly regarded her with genuine respect. It was a side of her he had never seen, a dimension of her character that his assumptions and limited attention had completely obscured. The sound of Emma's laughter from the next room reminded him that whatever else Rosa had been doing, she had never neglected her primary responsibility. Emma was thriving, well-adjusted, and apparently learning values about service and community engagement that Marcus had failed to teach himself. As he stood in the kitchen where Rosa prepared thousands of meals, helped with countless homework assignments, and apparently planned charitable projects that would impact hundreds of families, Marcus realized that the woman who had broken him was not someone who had betrayed his trust. She was someone who had kept it in ways he had never imagined, honoring commitments he had forgotten making and preserving values he had lost sight of. The real question was not what Rosa had done in secret, but what he was going to do now that her secret was revealed. And began clearing the documents with methodical precision. Marcus watched her transform back into the familiar figure he knew, changing from the confident community leader who had just secured millions in funding to the gentle caregiver who would soon help Emma with math homework and prepare dinner for a family that had no idea of her secret life. But, as she moved through the familiar routine of organizing her papers, Marcus noticed details he had missed before. The briefcase she used was expensive leather, well-worn but high quality. Her watch, which he had always assumed was a simple timepiece, appeared to be a vintage Cartier. The cell phone that sat on the counter was a latest model iPhone in a professional case, not the basic smartphone he would have expected someone on a housekeeper's salary to carry. Rosa finished securing her documents and was reaching for her apron when she stopped, her hand frozen in mid-motion. Slowly, she turned toward the doorway where Marcus stood, her eyes meeting his with an expression of startled recognition. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The afternoon light continued to stream through the windows, highlighting the space between them that felt suddenly charged with unspoken questions and uncomfortable truths. Rosa's face revealed nothing, not guilt, not fear, but a calm acceptance that suggested she had always known this moment would come. "Mr. Wellington," she said quietly, her voice carrying the same gentle authority he had been listening to for the past hour. "You are home early." He walked through the formal living room, past the dining room with its antique table that seated 12, and toward the kitchen that formed the heart of their family's daily routine. The sound of voices drifted toward him, Emma's bright laughter mixed with Rosa's gentle responses. Marcus smiled, quickening his pace slightly, eager to interrupt their peaceful afternoon with his unexpected presence. As he approached the kitchen doorway, Marcus paused to compose himself, wanting to savor the moment of surprise on both their faces. He could hear Emma asking Rosa about something, her voice filled with the earnest curiosity that made even the simplest conversations with his daughter feel precious. Marcus stepped forward, ready to announce his early return with theatrical fanfare, when the scene in the kitchen stopped him cold. What he saw in that doorway would change everything he thought he knew about the woman who had become his family's anchor, and force him to confront truths about loyalty, sacrifice, and the real meaning of family that he had never fully understood. The afternoon light streaming through the kitchen windows illuminated a tableau that would be burned into his memory forever, revealing secrets that Rosa had guarded with the same fierce devotion she brought to every aspect of caring for his family. In that moment of frozen discovery, Marcus realized that the woman he had trusted with his most precious possession, his daughter's well-being, had been carrying burdens he had never imagined, making sacrifices he had never recognized, and protecting them all in ways that went far beyond the duties outlined in any employment contract. Standing in that doorway, briefcase forgotten behind him and the weight of his business empire suddenly insignificant, Marcus Wellington was about to learn that some forms of wealth cannot be measured in dollars, and some kinds of loyalty run deeper than blood.